December was busy and stressful, and my anxiety came back with a vengeance, so I seriously thought that this was going to be the month where I read less than my average number of books, and I broke my record by 3. Hello folks, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing a wrap-up of all of the 16 books that I read in December. So if you watched my last monthly wrap-up where I had made really thorough notes for every single book and you liked that, you are shit out of luck because I am not doing that today. With anxiety making a comeback, I mean, the anxiety has kind of gone down, but the depression has kind of reared its head. So the thought of like having to do thorough summaries and notes for every single book is not fun. So I'm not going to do it. So what I'm just going to do is I'm going to say the title and the author. Why did I pick it up? What were my expectations? Did it meet those expectations? If I have other thoughts, great. And if I don't, if it was that forgettable or even somewhat forgettable, we're going to move on so that I don't have like 3 hours of footage to edit. Cool. First book I read was an audiobook that I had borrowed from my library. This is So You Want to Talk About Race by Ijeoma Oluo. This was a book that came out around the turn of the 2016 election. I can't remember if it came out like right before or right after. But in my mind, it's one of the talking about racism in America books that I feel got a lot of attention but is like a little bit older in the context of our current conversations. Even though, so what I liked about this book was I do think it really lives up to the title in that it gives you some tactics and some understanding about how to have conversations about race and racism in America. I think there's something in there for all dynamics. And even though it says like, yeah, this book is going to be uncomfortable or I'm not going to pull punches, compared to some stuff that I think has come out after it, and especially a lot of the conversations we were having after the protests around George Floyd's death back in 2020, compared to conversations I feel like we are having now, this book feels very gentle and polite. Not polite. Gentle, patient, and thorough. There are a lot of example conversations that the author gives. Oh, the audiobook is narrated by the author, and she's great. But there are a lot of anecdotes that the author gives of sample conversations that really are like, this person, one of the early ones they talk about is, well, why do we have to focus on race? Like, wouldn't it be better to like focus on improving everyone's economic status? And that's going to affect everybody, right? Like, wouldn't that be better and easier? And, she patiently breaks apart, the problem is, like, that's not actually going to help everybody. Raising the minimum wage isn't going to help somebody who can't get hired because of the name on their resume, or because they are a single parent who can't afford childcare, or whatever other reason. She kind of, I think, really patiently like carries you along the conversation, and then I think kind of to compare it to something like How to Be an Anti-Racist, I feel like the tone of that one is the easy part was you showing up and now it's your job to hang on. I think like the thing that was new for me and most valuable for me were the moments where she talks about tactics and like the psychology of what is going on when we are having these difficult conversations. It's great. Yay. The next book I picked up was The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. I picked it up because this is a YouTube favorite, and it's also fantasy, which is by far my genre. I thought I was going to really like it, and I did. But I feel like I made a point to film this video before doing like my top books of the year, because I'm gonna say the same stuff there and I don't really want that to be the spoiler for this month. Doesn't matter, probably not. I really like it. I definitely think it's one of the best written books I've read all year. It didn't make it into my top 10. I definitely want to continue with the series, but I feel like once I'm done reading the series, that's going to be it. I'm not going to want to return to it. I think there's just one too many tropes, doesn't feel like the right word, but like choices of main plot and character things that are not quite my jam. Like, I don't mind a morally gray character, but I kind of prefer my characters to start more morally gray and then develop into being more decisive, and I kind of felt like Rin went the other way. I felt like the god pantheon and the magic system was kind of vaguely developed, which I have the impression that it's going to get more developed in more books. So overall, I might really like the series more than I like the first book, and I understand that first books are set up, but it just, like, it was good. I see the hype. There's just, like, enough little things that are not 8 or 9 out of 10. They're, like, 6 to, like, a consistent, like, 6 or 7. Personal preference. Seriously, just personal preference. Anyway, it is really good. And I am really excited and interesting to finish the series. I just based on the first book, I don't know if this is going to be a series that I return to multiple times. Anyway. The next book I read was 50 Shades of Grey. It wasn't as bad as I was expecting. Oh, it was still bad. I just had set my expectations so low that I was surprised, and I'm like, I thought you'd be a 0, and I think you're at least like a 1.5 star. I'll explain. So I picked this up because in my last monthly wrap-up, I tell you I discover, like, erotic novels, like, you know, romance novels, but kick it up a notch. But, like, trying to find one that I think really suits me. The reviews seem to be, it's like 50 Shades. It's not like 50 Shades. And that's it. And if it's a paranormal romance, it's like Twilight, or not Twilight, which makes sense because this was originally based on a fanfiction Twilight. It's the standard everyone is holding shit to, so I might as well learn what the fuck that standard is. I read it because I was curious, which a friend of mine reminded me that was like their entire marketing campaign, so I'm like, well, I hope they all got a raise because they knew what the fuck they were doing. So what do I mean by it wasn't as bad as I was expecting? So I was expecting its portrayals of BDSM and this kind of intense relationship to be, like, dangerous and full of just blatant misinformation, and I would definitely tone that down to it's mostly clumsy. Sometimes it's kind of careless, but it just reads more like someone has fantasized of the idea of this kind of relationship but never actually been in it. What I wasn't expecting was this book is really, really ambitious in how many types of readers it appeals to. It's not just a kinky book, it's also attempting to be this epic romantic transformation love story. The author makes a lot of references to the main character Anna being like a literature major and writing her thesis on Anna of Tess de Ubervilles. And I haven't read a lot of, like, the classical fiction romances, but I've just, like, I remember enough from, like, AP high school English to be like, this book was trying to hit some of those plot beats. So that was, like, one thing, and there's, like, a couple other things in there that's like, okay, and definitely, like, in the next books, when it gets to be more action-y, I've read reviews, I'm not interested in reading the rest of the books. But there's definitely, like, I definitely see that the author was trying to put something in there for everybody. I don't think it was particularly successful in any of those categories. But, like, you know what? You tried to go big or go home, and I can't hate you for that. I enjoyed the hating of it while I was reading it. It's a junk food book. The parts in the relationship I did not like was, for all that Christian Grey says that he's very familiar with this this type of relationship, this, you know, the BDSM scene, there was just so much about his behavior that is full of red flags. The way that he has no business accepting Anna's consent when she still clearly doesn't know what the fuck is going on. The weird thing about food, it's like, how do you not pick up on the reason that she's not eating is because you are making her too fucking nervous? Like, you need, like, a good dom needs to be able to pick up on cues like that. I didn't like how they put all this emphasis into, like, the contract and the boundaries of it, but then, like, they never fucking sign the contract. I mean, they sign, like, one, but then not, like, the other one. And then there's, like, no boundaries for, like, when you are in the scene and when you're not, and, like, that's super important. I don't like that the only character of color that's given a name, like, attempts to make out with Anna when she's clearly really, really drunk. And, like, he kind of apologizes for it and feels bad, but, like, that felt weird. I was having fun thinking that the real romance that should have happened was between Anna and Cait. There's just, if you just, like, pick out a bunch of lines out of context, like, there's a way to read into, like, how much Anna just loves Cait. So that was, it was just, like, a fun thing I was doing to make it through parts of the book that were just not my favorite. I don't know, I guess now I have a thing to talk about with all of the people who have read it. Let's move the fuck on. So, the next book I read was Melt Into You by Roni Loren. This was kind of like a palate cleanser to read after 50 Shades, because I really liked the first book I read by Roni Loren last month, which was Crash Into You. So this one, I'm not going to remember anyone's names because I have no notes and I have a memory like a goldfish. Jace? Is that his name? I'm going to call him Jace. I am not sure that that's actually his name. But we follow the friend from the first book who runs a sex shop, and then his like go-to threesome partner, and in the beginning they are not romantically involved, though the partner is bisexual, and they talk about that from the beginning. So some bisexual rep, cool. And then they start a relationship with a woman who is, so they start a relationship with her. She is someone from Jace's past, and she is in a fake engagement with somebody who is gay but wants to hide it because he's got, like, a really big, like, book deal, public speaking, TV circuit of him and the woman, being, like, public couples counselors. So, like, a Dr. Phil, but, like, couples counseling. So that's a whole thing. In this book, Roni Loren's books tend to have, like, some heavy context in them. They're not going to be for everyone. In this one, trigger warnings I can think of off the top of my head are, the main woman is a former foster child, and she becomes a runaway and gets involved in some sexual exploitation of homeless and minors. She's, like, weirdly complicit in it in a way that's, like, necessary for survival, but, like, she herself is not assaulted that I know of. Non-consensual outing of people's sexuality or, like, personal lives. So that's just what I can think of off the top of my head. This one was good. Again, like, the way that Loren writes about BDSM, consent, boundaries, reading cues, the power balance that is there, even though people are playing a role. That was all great, sexy, fun. Love it. I felt like it didn't quite pack the same punch as the first book. I feel like the stakes weren't really as high, and they were dependent on, like, people lying to each other from the beginning, which was kind of weird. Also, the bisexual partner is a police officer, and there is some power play fantasies involved with that, which, given current climate, is really just like, I know it's just a fantasy. this book was not written with current events in mind, but it was still just like, I feel really taken out of it, and that's not the author's fault, that's just the way of the world right now. It's good. It's a good return to this world. And then at the end of the month, I read the third book in the series, so I'll get to that in a minute. Yeah, this is definitely, like, an author that I'm going to be reading through, like, all of her backlist, because, like, for the things that are necessary for me to enjoy it, like, in terms of, like, honesty, communication, consent, boundaries, etc., like, she sets the bar really, really high for that, and then, like, I feel safe. I feel safe in imagining these scenarios. Cool. The next book I picked up was a DNF. This was Foundation by Isaac Asimov. I had, like, book 3 and 4 on my to-be-read shelf, and I was like, I think I've read the first one, but I don't remember it, so I need to reread it again and be like, do I like this series? And as I was reading it, I got, like, 40% in. Anyway, as I was reading it, I'm like, oh yeah, a lot of the story's coming back to me, and the concept is really interesting, but the execution to my modern brain was boring. It's just the writing style, the way that it jumps in time, so you never really get, like, characters never really get a lot of development because you're jumping like 50 years every time, so maybe you see the same character in 2 segments, but then they're dead, and we're moving on to a whole new set of characters. So the concept is really interesting. It's just, it was a different time. And there are so many other books I want to read that I know I'm going to enjoy more than this one. So, DNF. So the next book I read was A Hero is Born by Yong. I picked this up as one of my books for the Reading in Translation Readathon. In that video, I think I switched the name around. But everywhere else that I have looked it up is in the order of Yong. So I'm sorry for my being presumptive of what the name actually is. So I picked this up for the readathon. This is translated from Chinese. It is part 1 of many, part 1 of 6 of, like, the most famous epic Chinese fantasy. The author is compared to Tolkien as one of the major literary figures. So this was amazing. I thought it was going to be interesting. I was just curious about it. And it ended up being one of my top books of the year. I listened to this on audiobook and physical book. I was expecting that I was going to have a little bit of a challenge with the naming conventions, with just the pronunciation and the spelling. And so that's on me to do a little bit of extra work to make sure that I am learning the names and cementing them into my memory, and being able to hear how they're pronounced and also see how they are spelled. That was really helpful for me. Fun thing though, I learned that my reading speed is slightly faster than 2x speed, and the app I was using to listening to it doesn't go faster than 2x. So that was fun. No, but it was fun. So this book follows 2 good friends who get killed by political forces, and I don't remember if they were on the run or whatever. Memory like a goldfish. I'm sorry. So they each get killed, and both of their wives are pregnant, and they get separated. So the whole saga, I think, is following the 2 sons of these characters, and there are these other mythical, maybe, but like there are these kung fu masters that then on a quest to like find these 2 children and then teach them, and then have them battle against each other as like a way to settle a dispute. It's a complicated book. It's setting up a lot. There's like a lot of Chinese history with the Mongols and the Jin dynasty, and then whoever is currently like in power in China, and the Jin are trying to usurp them. Am I remembering that right? I don't know. So there's a lot of backstory, and then the best part of these books are the kung fu fights. If you are a fan of like I mean, my only, like, movie reference really is, like, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, where, like, the kung fu is, like, physics-defying, almost, like, magical. This is it. Also, it's no surprise that, like, this made it into my top 10 of the year, and so did Jade War, because the fight season in that one are, like, comparable and also, like, amazing. As far as the history, I did feel like we were introduced to it thoroughly, and, like, while reading it, like, I can't remember it for shit, but, like, while reading it, I didn't really feel that lost, and anything that I did anything that I was fuzzy on, I felt like was going to be developed later. The only place where I really struggled with was there are several moments where we are introduced to, like, 5 or 6 new characters all at the same time. And that was where listening to the names and seeing them written really helped cement who these individual characters are, and then also referring to the character sheet in the book. But, like, overall, like, it was so much fun. It was so much fun. Like, I also really liked the way that the women were written. Like, this book was written, like, in the 50s, so, like, maybe portraying women poorly in fiction is not a universal thing. Maybe. Like, there weren't that many women characters, but they were each very interesting. They all had very distinct personalities and motivations. The ones who knew kung fu were just as competent as the men, and the men didn't question that, or they weren't, like, too insulted by that. And also, like, while culturally we do get the sense that there is this underestimating of women in this culture, you know, women aren't fighters, women aren't strong, women aren't going to cause a lot of trouble. The female characters use that to their advantage. They use it to their advantage. So I liked it. It was a good time. I'm looking forward to seeing where the series goes. Yeah, no wonder that when you look up, like, books translated into Chinese, this is, like, the most talked about. Cool. That was great. The next book I picked up is one that I actually own a physical copy of. That is The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. This was a book haul I bought pretty, like, maybe in the spring of 2020, and then I didn't get around to it until December. And this one also made it into my top 10 of the year. This follows 3 perspectives of 3 women of 3 different ages in this world that periodically goes through these seasons with a capital S. And it is a season of some kind of climate catastrophe. This series is often touted as being, like, a climate disaster based fantasy fiction. And while it's not explicit in terms of, like, the world is like this because humans fucked with it, there is this implication that the world is getting revenge for the cruelties of people, maybe. So periodically the world will go through several months, up to several years or even decades of a season where, like, there's a lot of volcanic eruptions and it blocks out the sun and it turns it into an ice age. Or there's, like, these really massive toxic algae blooms that make it impossible to fish, or, like, even makes the water, like, really acidic. Within that, there are these magical people called origines. And they have the ability to draw life and heat and energy from the world around them and then transform it into some kind of geological thing. So they will draw all the heat from, you know, they'll make a huge ice rink that will, like, instantly kill any living thing within its perimeter, and then they will use it to, like, build a huge wall of earth. There is one perspective we are following where you see how these origins are sometimes collected. They are basically trained to be able to use that power in a way that is less damaging and more productive. But when they are not collected into this organization, the young origin children are often hunted and killed because people are really afraid of them. So that's this whole world. Something that I think I'd heard of, but I wasn't quite aware of how much I was going to see. It was how much of the parallels of this are tied into blackness, especially blackness in America and in white Eurocentric places. There's a lot about, like, with the way that, like, origin children are often killed, there is a parallel to, you know, the way that black children are perceived as a threat at younger and younger ages compared to their white counterparts. There's a lot in this book about parenthood, the struggles of parenthood, the struggles of being a parent when you personally are going through a lot. Like, why would you choose to be a parent when you know that your children are going to suffer? But then also, like, you have the right to be a parent and try to build a better world for your children. Towards the end, when we figure out how these three perspectives are interconnected, like, I think like I started to, like, clue into it, like, maybe a chapter before that it happened, but oh, it was so good. It was so good. So anyway, I really, really want to get to the rest of the series. I do think I would pick up the rest of the series on ebook, because I've talked about this before, but I am someone who will, like, flip through how long to the end of a chapter, how, like, blah blah blah. So I think the only reason I might want a physical chapter is for the map, but I already have one, and also the way they have it printed, most of the information is in the crease of the book. So, like, there's a lot that happens right here. Why? Anyway, it was great. Yay. The next book I picked up was one of the oldest books on my physical TBR that I finally got around to. This is the complete works of Tomás Rivera. Tomás Rivera is an early iconic figure in Chicano literature, writing about Chicano experiences and Chicano identity. The first part of this book are his short stories, which are first printed in their original Spanish and then translated into English. And then he's got a whole bunch of poetry that I think they are all kept in their original languages. Like, the Spanish is not translated into English, though there were a couple in here that I feel like later on I found, like, the English version of a poem, but they were also, like, quite different. Like, it was kind of like he wrote one in Spanish and then, like, revisited the idea again in English. So that was interesting, but I didn't clue into it early enough to be able to, like, track them and, like, compare them intricately. And then at the end, there are some critical essays about, like, writing and storytelling that I actually skipped because I was tired and didn't want to read the nonfiction part of it. This was interesting. He talks a lot about being a migrant worker, being a child migrant worker, and, like, a lot of these small towns that the migrant workers have to live in and travel to and through. A lot of the stories are very dialogue driven. They're literally just, like, dialogue between two characters, but I can definitely see that a lot of this is drawn from personal experience, and I can definitely see how many people would have resonated with this work, because I guess, like, when this stuff was published, it was probably the first time that a lot of Latinx heritage, Mexican heritage, migrant workers ever saw their own lives and experiences reflected in literary work. And there's a lot in here about the traumas of children and the way that they kind of get, like, desensitized to them. They're like, yeah, I have nightmares, but, like, there's no point in telling the adults about it because they're just gonna laugh at me. I think about this in contrast to The Hamon and the Beans, which is a book I read earlier this year that also is, like, an early anthology of Chicano literature, and that one I didn't like because it was the type of really, really dense short story where if you didn't have the proper context, you couldn't understand what the fuck was going on. And this one, I felt like even if I didn't have the experiences of living through these things, I could pick up on the major themes and the major, like, there's a lot about children being in school and just the simple barrier of feeling othered. Yeah, there's a scene where, like, the teacher is poking his head for lice, and even though it's not explicit, it's implied that, like, this is something that happens to him because he's a migrant child or because he's a brown child that doesn't happen to the white children. It was good. I feel like there's probably a lot that I missed that if I was, like, reading this in a literature class, I would be able to spend more time and have more discussions to kind of peel stuff apart. But I'm like, all right, I see why he is an iconic figure in Chicano literature. So, if you don't know, the term Chicano is a term for people of Mexican heritage living in America, and that is a word that came about with the social justice movements of the 50s and 60s. It is the word that they chose for themselves, in contrast to words that were assigned to them, like Hispanic or Latino or Mexican American. So just for context, when I say Chicano, that is only people of Mexican heritage living in America. And the significance is that is a word that the community chose for itself, is my understanding. The next book I finished was the audiobook of The Year of Less by Cait Flanders. There's another title in there of, like, how I gave away all of my belongings and learned to be satisfied with what I had, or something like that. So this has, I think, kind of middle road reviews, and a lot of people drop stars because the title is misleading, which I agree with. It's less a how-to in the vein of, you know, Magic of Tidying Up with Marie Kondo, and more a memoir that elaborates on the experiences that this author had during the time that she was running the blog Blonde on a Budget, where she was going through a period of time where she was, like, doing a no buy year and giving away her stuff. So this book kind of goes into, like, a lot of, like, personal backstory and other things that were more personal but definitely had an impact on her life. Okay, so all right, so let's, you know, the title's misleading. Let's just take it as it is, as a memoir. It's interesting, but I feel like it's gonna be kind of forgettable, because I feel like this book would have more of an impact if you were somebody who had read her blog and already had some kind of connection to her story and her experience. But I do think she touches on some interesting things. You know, she's someone who is a recovering alcoholic, so she touches on the ways that, you know, buying stuff, accumulating stuff are often coping mechanisms, and she does kind of tie that into the coping mechanism that was drinking alcohol. It's valuable in that it kind of shows you more than just, if you have less stuff you'll be less stressed, but more like, this is why it's so hard, like, this is why it is a coping mechanism, this is why it is difficult, and this is why being able to identify your shopping habits and feel in control of them can be very beneficial to your mental health. I don't regret picking it up, but it was of the minimalism, decluttering, life simplifying content I have read or engaged in, it's just not one of my favorite. The next book I picked up was the graphic novel The Wicked and the Divine, Volume 2, Fandemonium. This is good. I like this series. I think it's beautifully illustrated. I like how the illustration style is consistent throughout the story, but there are some things that change from character to character. Like this is a scene in like a fantasy nightclub with the iteration of Dionysus, and this is like the beats, like 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 of the music that's playing in the background. So you know, I like learning more about the story. It's a story of I am doing a little bit of summaries in here. Cool. Every 90 years 12 gods are reborn into existing human bodies, but they only last 2 years, and something is going through and killing the gods before their 2 years is up. So this elaborates a lot more on why that is happening, and at the end we kind of discover who is actually doing it, and the ending was interesting. It was just left me with being like, so where's the story gonna go from here? What? But it also kind of felt like this build up to something really cool that then got cut short really quickly. So I don't know if that is actually the end of that storyline. So okay, it made me curious for the next series. Great. Yay. The next book I picked up was the audiobook of Goodbye Things by Fumio Sasaki. This was, I picked up on recommendation from Lena Norms. She kind of compared it to The Magic of Tidying Up, and she likes this one better, and I agree with her. So this is written by a Japanese man who, I think the book is published after Marie Kondo's book, but he went through this process before she rose to fame, and it's his journey with minimalism, not just like decluttering and organizing, but really minimalism. He touches on a lot of the same beats of like, you know, cleaning becomes less stressful when you don't have to move anything to be able to clean everything, you know. I think I like that he has a couple of points where he like puts stuff into like very clear like lists and bullet points. I mean, I was only listening to it on audiobook. This is something I would like to see in a physical copy. You know, I know a lot of people had a critique of Marie Kondo because she was like saying just throw it out, which is like, okay, but like if you are able to like donate it or sell it or give it away, like you can use your brain to interpret that as is comfortable for you. And this book does touch on some ways of getting rid of your things, like selling things, using bulk auction houses to get rid of stuff, if you want to get rid of a lot of furniture all at once. So he touches on like more than just throw it out. You know, he is like, get rid of means multiple things. I've got two quotes here that I wanted to touch on. I like that he sums this up as minimalism is not a goal. It is a method for an individual to find the things that are truly important to them. And with my little flirtation with that, I'm like, yeah, I do agree with that. And that kind of leads into this next comment. He's talking specifically about the wardrobe of Steve Jobs and Mark Zuckerberg. Jobs had his iconic black turtleneck. Zuckerberg has his iconic white t-shirt. And there's a quote of like, they like the ease of having like the same wardrobe every day because they would rather spend that time doing something creative, which I took a little bit of umbrage with. Again, like I can use my brain to apply this in the way that's appropriate to me, but what I mean by that is I find personal style, clothing, makeup, and just kind of style in general, I find that to be a very rewarding creative outlet for myself. But that's also something that I have discovered while experimenting with reducing my wardrobe. And like every time I try to think about like wearing just like iconic Instagram wardrobe basics, like one black t-shirt, one white t-shirt, one pair of jeans, and the more I think about my wardrobe being a uniform, the more I hate that idea. So while I'm like, I kind of take umbrage with like the idea of like clothing not being creative, I know that like I figured that out because minimalism is not a goal, it's a method. Okay. I will say this book I think did have a similar issue that I had with Marie Kondo's book of the idea of not holding on to extras of things or getting rid of something, and if you really, really need it, you can just buy it again. Now, I do think this book does go into a little bit more depth that your cost of living is less when you have less things. You can live in a smaller space with smaller rent. If something is damaged, you have the mental capacity and the time to fix it, or decide, no, I'm not going to fix this. I'm just going to get a new one, and then like that task is done immediately. And that, anyway, so I think he does like elaborate how it does help improve you financially a little bit, but I suspect that this must be somewhat rooted in a cultural difference where I wonder how much abject poverty in Japan looks different than abject poverty in America, where, you know, hanging on to things just in case because you literally can't afford to buy a new one like that's prevalent here. That's prevalent here. And I don't know what that looks like in Japan. And also I don't know how rampant consumerism and like the keeping up with the Joneses psychological trip of our capitalist culture, I don't really know what that looks like in Japan, where, you know, the way that you prove your success is by the things you own. Is this something that I think culturally we are starting to undo a little bit? So anyway, so I acknowledge that that is something that I still haven't really found someone who talks about it a lot, but like people are starting to get better at giving like a disclaimer of like, if this doesn't apply to your financial situation, then it's not a hard and fast rule. You need to find what works for you. But I do think we're still struggling to make content that is inclusive for the people who are coming at this from a very different perspective, and like really being like, no, I want you front and center because some of this is going to help you too, not just this isn't for you, so if it doesn't fit, don't take it personally. Anyway, but I do think this is good. I'm going to keep I'm going to keep my eye out for a secondhand copy of this, because I would like to read it in a physical form. Okay, continuing. The next book I picked up was Backstage Pass by Olivia Cunning. This is another erotic romance. This follows, I don't remember anyone's names, a woman who is supposedly a human sexuality psychologist who then falls in with her favorite rock and roll band and gets involved with the lead songwriter and guitarist. This was fine. It was fun. I feel like the human sexuality professor was like an interesting plot point for a couple of things, but I don't think that anyone who's actually taken a class like that or actually has like a psychology degree is gonna feel like it's very true to real life. It's my impression. There's some parts of this book that are just like funny. There's a moment with some coitus interruptus in a public bathroom that is like kind of gross, but also like, yeah, that's what would happen. So it was a fun time. There's a lot of discussion about like the weird hyperfixation and what's the word I'm looking, like obsession and like fantastical obsession of groupies with band members, which I just don't really know enough about, if the way that those characters actually talk and think about, like the way that they're like, but I love you because I know everything about you, but everything they know about this person they learned from a Wikipedia article. I would have liked to have like a little bit more examination of that psychology in a way that didn't feel so like demeaning and exploitative. Like, it wasn't that bad, but like, of course, I mean, I think this is just preference, where I'm like, where I saw the potential for an interesting conversation that didn't happen, but it's like, but you didn't come to this book for interesting conversations, you came here for sexy fun times, and those are fine, great. So it was a good time. I might check out other things by this author. And after that, I read the third book in the Loving on the Edge series by Roni Loren, Fall Into You. So this follows Grant, is that his name? The guy who runs the ranch, the BDSM exclusive retreat place. And then a sports investigative journalist who she ends up taking refuge at the ranch to hide because someone is after her because of a story that she's investigating. And then they get into a relationship and kind of help each other overcome some hurdles they have in their love life. With that, trigger warnings of death of a spouse, home invasion, family estrangement. What else? That's all I can think of off the top of my head. So yeah, again, like, you come to these books for the sexy fun times, and those are good. I will have to say, this is the first time, I think, in any media I have ever seen someone refer to the cleanup that can be involved. It's not a lot. It's like one sentence, but it's still like, of course, like, I know we come into these stories for fantasy and escapism, and we don't want to know all the gross details, but also, like, yes, washcloths make a frequent appearance. Great. I feel like this one, it was hard for me to kind of judge it. I feel like it felt like maybe the least strong of the ones I've read, but it's hard for me to judge because I went into this book thinking we were going to learn how Grant started the ranch and then like how he got into this lifestyle, because with his first marriage he mentions that like they had never got to the point where they were discovering this lifestyle, and I felt like that was like a huge missed plot point. I was really curious about like how does one go from like being, what is he, like a Marine or something, to running a super high security exclusive sex retreat that houses like celebrities and politicians and stuff. Like, I want to know about how that happened, but that was not the focus of the story. So I think I was disappointed just because, again, like, there was a thing that I wanted that just wasn't what the book was about, and that's not the writer's fault. Okay, moving on. So the next two books were the other books I read in the Reading in Translation readathon. So this first one was Frankenstein in Baghdad. I didn't write down the author's name. Shame on me. My internet is not working right now, so I can't look it up. I will put it here. I am sorry for not even... And I can't look it up on my phone because this is my phone. So, Frankenstein in Baghdad by this person. So this was probably the one I was most excited about going into the readathon, and it was good. It wasn't quite what I was expecting. I definitely wanted more of like a horror monster story, which, joke's on me, I've actually read the original Frankenstein, and that's not really what it's about. So shame on me for expecting something that I should have known better that it was not about. What was interesting was it reminded me a lot of the writing style of Salman Rushdie, who I read a lot in high school, and I think my brain wasn't really ready to absorb his writing. I don't want to use the term magical realism because I feel like that's actually really specific and it gets thrown around a lot in a way that's actually kind of culturally insensitive, I think. But there is this blend of the horrors of the actual events that are happening and then what seem to be these paranormal or fantastical or how can that be real events that happen alongside it that kind of are reflective of and amplifying the real events that are happening. So, I mean, in summary, as of the title, so this story follows a reanimated corpse that is inhabited by the spirit of a bombing victim, and the corpse is made up of different parts from various bombing victims. And then, so the spirit is kind of on revenge to avenge each of the parts of the body, but then like as a part is avenged, it falls off, so then they have to claim a new victim. So there's a lot of conversations about like who is guilty, who is free from guilt in a war zone where everyone is just kind of scrabbling to survive or get power or just survive until things stabilize. I think the thing that I really liked about the ending, though, was suddenly, like, everything we've been told is thrown into doubt of, like, but was this actually a monster? Was it the voice of this other person? Did this person actually see this, or were they the one who actually did it? So there's a lot in there about the fault of memory and the way that these various snippets of stories can come together into this like urban legend or like fantastical thing, but everything's chaos, so who the fuck knows what the truth is. So it was interesting. I liked it. It just didn't quite meet my expectations, but that's kind of my own fault. So the next book I read is... Oh, and sorry, this book was translated from Arabic into English. The next book I read was translated from Japanese into English. This is Murder in the Crooked House by this person. So this is a locked room mystery. This one was interesting. I feel like I would have benefited from this being like an actual physical book. I would have benefited from being able to have pages so I could refer to the diagrams of the house, because the house is like this weird, not quite level, weird layout maze that is very critical to the whole story. And even with seeing the diagram and then like reading these really detailed descriptions, I think not being able to refer to them constantly made it really difficult to follow what was going on. I don't know how much of this was like a writing style, a flaw in the translation, or if this is something that is common in locked room mysteries, because I don't think I've really read one before. But periodically you'll check in with various characters or the police detectives, and they will just like in detail go through everything that has happened, and these are all the theories, and these are why they don't work, and it's like, you're literally gonna leave me no room to wonder. But maybe that's a part of it, to be like, I promise you the solution is not going to be that easy. But then when we get to the actual solution, I'm like, okay, I see what you mean, how all the parts were there, but like, even with looking at the house diagram and the explanations of the house, that felt impossible. Is that just me? Or does every like locker room mystery feel like that? You get to the end and you're like, how the fuck was I supposed to know that that was what happened? Anyway, I think like overall I enjoyed it. It was just a strange experience. Okay, last one. We can do it. So the last novella I read was Wrapped Up in You by Talia Hibbert. This is a Christmas holiday themed romance novella. I got it for free from the Kobo ebook store. This was cute. It's only the second thing of hers that I've actually read, but I feel like it's not my favorite. It's going to be kind of forgettable. I think it suffered for being so short, but yet it felt like too short and too dense at the same time. I was frustrated with the characters because I felt like... So one of the main conflicts is the main woman doesn't want to confess that she feels the same romance with the dude, because she doesn't just want to fling, she wants like a real romance. But that's exactly what he wants. And I felt like it was really clear that they were on the same page. And I'm like, why are you pretending like you don't act... Like the miscommunication felt like a little bit too forced. I'm like, I listened to what he says, and he is saying he wants the exact same thing as you, so why do we still have another 100 pages of y'all not listening to each other? But anyway, but it was cute. It was a cute little feel-good holiday thing where you know everything is going to turn out just fine. The grandmother is a delight. There's cats everywhere. So I guess we ended on a good note. Okay, that's my video. If you are interested, check out my previous video, which is my 2020 reading wrap-up and my goals for the coming year. As always, I will leave a list of all the books I mentioned in the description box below. I will also have a link to all of my social media, including a Storygraph account, in the description box if you would like to connect with me elsewhere. I hope you have a good rest of your day. I encourage you to go out into the world and be curious. I'll catch you in my next video.